本日はお忙しい中、
Thank you very much for coming to the UK-Japan Online Symposium organized by the Theatre Museum Collaborative Research Center for Theatre and Film Arts of Waseda University, entitled The Future of Theatre and Online Screening in Cinemas from the Cases of National Theatre Live in the UK and Shochiku in Japan. And I am Hasegawa from the Theatre Museum. And I ask you for your cooperation, and I would like to now ask the director of our museum, Minako Okamuro, for a few words. So once again, thank you very much for coming to this symposium entitled The Future of Theatre and Online Streaming and Screening in Cinemas from the Cases of National Theatre Live in the UK and Shochiku in Japan. We have had symposiums as well as exhibitions concerning the theater during COVID and streaming and screening in cinemas. How should we understand this? That was the question that we have taken up as our research. A theater is a place where people share time and space and enjoy a play on stage. However, streaming or screening is something that is quite different from the theater experience. However, under COVID, once again, we were shown the power of performing arts. Maybe we should rethink the definition of theater. Maybe we are at such a time, and we have wonderful guest speakers today, and we will be able to hear from each of the speakers about their thoughts. So I do hope that you will be able to enjoy the symposium until the very end. Thank you very much.
岡室先生ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Dr. Okamuro. So now I'd like to explain why we are holding this symposium. Our research center has been established under the Theatre Museum, and we have been certified as a Center for Joint Use and Joint Research by the Ministry of Education in 2009. And we have been contributing to the research of diverse theater and films. Since 2020, when the pandemic started, we decided that we will record what's happening under COVID in order to communicate to the next generation. We have been gathering a lot of information as well as materials from theaters in Japan and overseas. Some have been exhibited online from October 2020, and that was entitled Online Exhibition Lost Performances, the Records and Memory of the COVID-19 Pandemic. And then in 2021, we had the special exhibition Lost in Pandemic Theater, Adrift Expressions, New Horizon. And this was published as a catalog, and this has been a focus of many visitors as well as the media. Now we are under the third year of COVID, and now the research center is looking at, is continuing our research and survey on performing arts and COVID. In July, we invited people from theaters around Tokyo, including the New National Theatre Tokyo, to talk about the meaning and issues related to archiving performing arts work. And also in August, we had 4 researchers of theater from Japan and South Korea. We try to compare the two countries' situation, and also we try to understand and discuss about the theater under COVID. And today, once again, we will be looking at the post-COVID era, and we will like to think about the future of theater. This is carried out as part of our research activities. Under COVID, streaming and screening at cinemas of performing arts has seen a heightening of demand. We would like to share examples from the UK and Japan, and we will share the challenges as well as future prospects. And we would like to also look at the changing experience at the theater and how that has changed through streaming and screening.
So I would now like to hand over to Miss Ishibuchi, who is going to be explaining and presenting today's program.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to our symposium. And we will be looking at cases from the UK and also Japan. In 2022, November, still we are affected by the new coronavirus pandemic. And in Japan, we now once again are seeing live performance in the theater. However, the number of visitors have declined compared to pre-COVID time. And also because of COVID infection of theater staff and actors, some had to be cancelled. In London, in the UK, starting in November, at the beginning of November, it was announced that subsidies for culture and arts organization will be reduced during the April 2023 to March 26 period, and this has sent shockwaves throughout the theater world in London. Now, the Theatre Museum of Waseda University has started to gather posters, programs, leaflets related to performing arts that have been cancelled due to the pandemic. And we had the special exhibition Lost in Pandemic Theater, Adrift, Expressions, New Horizon, as well as the online exhibition Lost Performances, the Records and Memory of COVID-19 Pandemic. And then in March 2023, we had the online symposium, Museums in the Age of COVID-19 Pandemic, Issues and Prospects Concerning Collection and Exhibition Materials. In July, we had the Issues and Prospects of Archiving Performing Arts Materials at Theaters and Museums. And then in August, we had a Japan-South Korea online symposium entitled Theater in the Age of Post-COVID-19 for Theaters in the Future. Now, under COVID, streaming of theater work has seen a heightening demand. And today, so we will be looking at cases from the UK and Japan to understand the future prospects. We will also look at the relationship between streaming and also live performances, and also the change, how that has streaming has the role of the changing role of streaming and screening. And today we have with us Shochiku, as well as National Theatre from the UK, that have been streaming and screening at cinemas of performing arts work even pre-COVID times. We also have researchers of the theater here with us, and we will be looking at how the performing art itself or theater itself has changed due to the increase in streaming of these performances. How will our attitudes toward theater change? How will it change toward the future even further? We would like to look at the potential of streaming performing arts, and would like to think along with the audience about the future of theater. Thank you very much.
With that, we'd like to move into the first part of our program. Our first speaker is joining us from the National Theatre in UK. This is Miss Flo Buckeridge.
She is the Deputy Director of Digital Media Department, National Theatre of England, and working on NT Live, NT at Home, and NT Collection. Flo is going to tell us about the past, the present, and the future of National Theatre Live, such as changes to the roles of NT Live before and during the pandemic, and how NT responded to COVID-19 through the course of the pandemic to the present. Dear Flo, could you please start your presentation?
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be here today. I will just start my presentation. Hello, as I was introduced, my name is Flo and I'm Deputy Director of Digital Media at the National Theatre in England. In its most broad terms, the digital media team look after anything that involves a camera or a moving image, from short form content like trailers, interviews, documentaries, right through to multi-camera captures of live theatre productions and making them available to audiences all over the world. Audiences can access our work in cinemas via National Theatre Live in the comfort of their own homes through our streaming platform NT at Home, and in their classrooms via the National Theatre Collection, which is an educational streaming service available to schools, universities and libraries. Although currently, as it was only launched in 2019, it is mainly in the English-speaking world. NT Live alone has reached an audience of 11.5 million people. In 2 years, 627 hours of productions have been watched on NT at Home, and 80% of UK state-funded schools are signed up to access the collection. But how did we get here? Back in 2009, we broadcast the production of Phaedra with Helen Mirren live via satellite from the National Theatre into cinemas as part of our pilot season of National Theatre Live. It was a bit of an experiment. We didn't know who was going to watch it, and we hadn't committed to doing it long term. We were very much influenced by the Met Opera in New York, who had started broadcasting their work, and we became the first theatre to do it. We started broadcasting with the intention to reach audiences we wouldn't ordinarily be able to, and those that we didn't reach through touring or through visiting us at the South Bank. But it was very much initially a way to reach more audiences in the UK. So the international success of NT Live was a bit of a surprise, but a very, very welcome one. NT Live was designed to replicate the theatrical experience as much as possible. The idea of a shared experience with an audience sitting together in a cinema as you would in a theatre was central to how we talked about it to the artists involved and how we were able to acquire the rights to do it. At the time, we thought it would be a one-night only screening of a play into cinemas. As the first season was such success, the National committed to the programme and the project grew. NT Live had to be sustainable for the organisation, and over time has become profit generating. Not every individual broadcast will make a profit, but overall it's essential that we generate income for the organisation and crucially for the artists involved. So in order to programme NT Live, we need to balance a number of things. So we need to balance what will generate the most income, what is the highest quality art we can share, and which productions have this crossover. How can we use NT Live to develop audiences, not just for NT Live, but for London and touring? And ultimately, what can we get the rights to do? We have many conversations about productions we want to film, but we can't due to the rights not being available. At the NT, at the National, we have the benefit of a continual season of work alongside the benefit of talent involved with film and cinema crossover. So Helen Mirren does some stage work, but is very well known around the world in film as well. Because we have such a wide-ranging audience globally to reach, we need to balance programming productions that have wide audience appeal whilst still ensuring we take the breadth of work at the National Theatre to audiences. We're also sometimes unable to broadcast productions because the rights, not just because the rights aren't available, but due to scheduling clashes with satellite space or other broadcasters, distributors and productions. We don't, for instance, want to release a production in the same week that James Bond is released. We do a significant number of broadcasts from outside the National Theatre as well, which has become core to our programming. We have built up the skills, knowledge and distribution network and are able to work with a range of partners to produce their work for cinema and help them reach a larger audience too. We have worked regularly with many other famous British theatres like the Old Vic, the Young Vic, the Donmar Warehouse, Sonia Friedman Productions, to name just a few. 13 years on, and we've reached a global audience of 11.5 million. And NT Live is a core way for the NT to reach audiences and remains central to our mission as an organisation. Rights can continue to be acquired for theatrical release only, because aside from educational streaming usage, we couldn't imagine how we'd share the recordings outside of cinema. In 2019, we actually had one of our strongest years yet, reaching 1.6 million people worldwide. And then in March 2020, COVID hit and the world stopped. It would be almost 2 years later before we were regularly screening NT Live in cinemas again. When theatres across the world had to close, like many organisations, we were initially expecting it to last a few weeks, maybe a month. We had no idea that it would be 6 months before anything was on our stages again. The theatre industry was going through arguably its most challenging period in history, and we were sitting on a huge catalogue of high quality recordings that we didn't have the rights to do anything with. That's when we made the decision to launch the first iteration of NT at Home, making NT Live and some archive recordings available for free on YouTube for a limited period. The idea was to bring people together again all over the world, to have a shared experience in their homes during the global pandemic, when we couldn't go to the theatre and we couldn't do things together. We released each production at 7 p.m. on Thursday, just like NT Live, which in the UK is always released on a Thursday, and made them available to watch for 7 days. We also used it as an opportunity to fundraise for the National Theatre. We initially thought we'd be releasing recordings for, say, 4 weeks. In the end, we shared 17 productions across 16 weeks, and we had over 15 million views. Although we knew statistics were skewed by the pandemic, this showed us that there was an appetite for watching this content on smaller screens. But we knew we had to establish a sustainable model for the National Theatre, and significantly for those artists involved who had made their work available for free. So NT at Home, the streaming and pay-per-view platform, was launched in December 2020. It's now approaching its second birthday. Its second birthday is tomorrow, actually. It was an absolutely mammoth job to get us to the point of launch. The rights were negotiated in 6 weeks, and the platform itself built in less than 10 weeks. We knew we had to do it now, and we had to do it fast. The success of NT at Home on YouTube was a big factor in us making the decision to invest in the platform. But we also really wanted to be able to provide an income stream for freelance artists who had been very hard hit by the pandemic in the UK. NT at Home on YouTube was all agreed to on goodwill. We have a history of paying out royalties on NT Live, and I think agents and artists felt able to support us during the pandemic in making their work available for free. However, it was also felt very much that this could only be a temporary approach. We felt it was essential we found a way to generate more income for the NT as our theatre productions continued to get closed due to a series of lockdowns and rules changing and actors catching COVID. The potential reach for NT at Home is also much wider. We have subscribers in 170 countries on every continent except Antarctica. And for a niche platform, we have found a niche and loyal audience, a younger audience on the whole than NT Live. The model for NT at Home is similar to NT Live. It's a profit share with all the artists involved. And programming for NT at Home can be much broader than NT Live. Owing to the large costs involved for NT Live that we need to recoup, we often lead towards more commercial programming, as I talked about earlier. We try and find that balance between the artistic and the commercial, whereas NT at Home, we do have a bit more of a broader reach. NT at Home lower caption costs allow us to reach a much wider programme of work, however. We still there we go. We still need to balance that same artistic with the financial, the rights with audience development. So we have many of the same considerations in programming. Historically, the leap from the theatrical shared experience to the concept of watching on small screens at home had felt like it was a step too far for some artists to get behind. If you had told me in February 2020 that by the end of the year we would have launched our own streaming platform, I never would have believed you. We've never had the rights to do anything we like with our recordings. Everything has to be negotiated separately. Making our work available on the streaming platforms or on television was something we had ambitions to explore, but it all felt very challenging. The pandemic really opened up doors for us. Alongside launching NT at home, we have been able to take up opportunities to screen on television in the UK and the United States, and to work with huge streaming platforms like Amazon. That's not to say we want to make all our productions available that way, but on select titles, we've been able to strike some interesting deals. So what's next for us? We are committed to growing both NT Live and NT at home, and a strong programme from NT Live can feed the content of NT at home. What would an investment in NT at home look like? Do we want to acquire other content that we haven't filmed? Is that part of our future? For NT Live, cinema audiences haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels. So we have our work cut out, rebuilding our audiences there. And whilst we would never claim that experiencing theatre digitally, whether on a cinema screen or in the comfort of your own home, is the same as the live experience in a theatre, it does offer an experience in itself and allows us to reach audiences we just wouldn't otherwise. So we're exploring all of these things. We are committed to growing NT at home, but also to growing NT Live, and to ultimately growing our audiences on the South Bank in London and touring. For us, we are hoping that all of these different ways in which you can experience theatre from the National Theatre will grow a theatre nation, theatre-going audiences of the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flo, for your fascinating presentation and starting things off. Thank you so much. And congratulations to the second birthday of NT at home tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Mr. Yuji Kubotera. 次のご発表
So the next presentation will be made by Mr. Yuji Kubotera, manager of the Theatrical Business Division of Shochiku. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Kubotera. So Shochiku started in 1895, and it focuses on kabuki films, anime, production, as well as screening. And from 2022, kabuki live streaming overseas has also started, and therefore he will be talking about that. He will be touching upon the kabuki streaming. So as was introduced, I'm from Shochiku. My name is Yuji Kubotera, and you may know that it is a company of theater as well as films. I am from the Theatrical Business Division. So this is about the rights of theater. Other than production, we also try to stream the theater. There is another division that takes care of theater streaming. So I would like to explain about the business of streaming theater at Shochiku. So streaming theater, I think there are many different ways to do this. There are two major businesses. One is streaming stage video, which is already recorded, and we also have live streaming as well. And also creation of content for streaming, like online talk shows and original contents are made for this purpose. And I would like to follow a timeline to explain how this happened. Now, before streaming started, we had we had the Cinema Kabuki and MetLife viewing. Cinema Kabuki is about recording kabuki and screening them at the cinema. And the first one started in 2005. About 40 of these films were made. So recording stage was done even before this, but this series started in 2005. Now, MetLife viewing. So this was about Metropolitan Opera Live. So because of time differences in Japan, usually we will not be able to view the opera live because sometimes it takes time to prepare subtitles, but we have started this in 2006. Now, live viewing is a term coined by Shochiku. It refers to live streaming of stage shows in a movie theater. So the Metropolitan Opera Live in HD is the title. Live in HD may be very difficult to understand, therefore we changed this to live viewing. And behind this is the Kabuki opera. There is this aging of the audience, and that has created a sense of crisis. So it has to be affordable, and we wanted people to enjoy these things. And we were hoping that that will bring more audiences to the theater. So in the United States and Japan, Kabuki, it was live streamed at the same time. And so we have been doing these streaming events even before COVID times. Now, also we have the Takarazuka productions and 2.5-dimensional musicals that were already live viewed. And in Shochiku, also, we were interested in live streaming and live viewing and streaming. However, we were not able to do this until 2020. But in 2020, we were supposed to do the name succession ceremony of Ichikawa Danjiro the 13th, and also we were supposed to live view the Olympic Games. And we have been considering this for a very long time, but before things started to roll, we had the pandemic started, and we were unable to do this. Now, streaming of the theater, especially Kabuki, there were big hurdles for this. One is, and this includes all theaters, there's the rights issue, the legal issues. There are a lot of different copyrights and peripheral rights around copyrights, and therefore it's very complex in order to straighten out these legal issues. And also, most actors were against this, especially the older Kabuki actors. They were concerned that if the performances were live viewed, the audiences will be drawn away from the theaters. And also in 2016, the Cho Kabuki was created, which was a collaboration between Kabuki and younger artists. And also NTT and Dubango required live streaming for this. And there were many different opinions, but this was free of charge, and this was a new challenge, and therefore this was done as an exception. Then in November 2018, the Koraya name succession, as well as Koraya, the third name succession performance, was live streamed, and this was a limited time only, and this was done as a promotion. So through these exceptions, and then in February, March of 2020, the Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was viewed as a paid service. It was shown in movie theaters, and then in April of 2020, the Cinema Kabuki, One Piece, and others were shown as a paid service. And that has changed after March 2020. Because many of performances had to be canceled, and therefore the rehearsals were filmed and they were streamed free of charge the next day. There were a lot of rehearsals without audiences, performances without audiences, which were filmed, and especially the Kabuki people wanted to stream this free of charge, and therefore Shochiku went to Kabukiza as well as the Minamiza in Kyoto, and also at Meijiza. But this was a service for audiences who could not come to the theater because of COVID. These were also exceptions, and this is the number of views. It was free of charge, therefore, we have seen great numbers of views. 177,000 was a super kabuki. And then the Meiji Zadankai was also, which were done with younger kabuki actors. And Kabukiza had the Shin Usuki Monogatari, which is a traditional theater, which could not be recreated anymore. This was streamed, however, not many people saw this because I think this is a gap because of the people who were used to looking at live streaming and others who are not used to looking at these screens through the internet. Now, from 2020 March to November, we did not have any performances, and that was when we had the talk shows like Kabuki Night Chat and Kyoicho Night Chat with Kabuki actors. And we also have a Zoom Kabuki. So younger Kabuki actors and young people at Shochiku decided to create a special program. So because there were no live performances, this was taken up by the Japanese media. And then in 2020 August, the Kabukiza performances restarted, and Kabuki On Demand started, and from August, we had paid services for people who missed the performance. And this was done for audiences who could not come to the theater because of COVID. And every month, we are showing these on-demand performances. And also we had the Johnny's and Associates live streaming performances. Nakamura Kichiemon's Sumaura was also streamed. This was performed at the Nogakudo without audiences. And this created a new trend in the streaming industry. Then in 2020 December, the theater streaming office was established. And my division has been doing streaming, but an independent office was created so that we can turn this into a business. So talk shows and also contents for screening were created. One other incident that happened, I would like to talk about the JLOD Live, which impacted the theater industry. In 2020, this is a subsidy project that was created back then. The live performances were provided with this subsidy. And in order to utilize this subsidy, you had to film a performance and you had to stream it on YouTube with subtitles for overseas viewers. And we also applied for this. It is a 5-minute long, only a 5-minute long film. However, we did this free of charge. And this was the first step for us to stream performances overseas. And then JLOD Live 2. Approaches for diversification of revenue channels were called for, and secondary use and tertiary use of these films were promoted. And other than Kabuki, we also started paid views. So now we have other theater works than Kabuki. Now, from 2020, live streaming as a paid service started. The first one was the Johnny's and Associates performance because the audience were young net users, and the red ones are related to Kabuki. And these were also aimed for younger Kabuki audiences. And from Kabukiza, we had a paid service live streaming in July this year, the Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Part 1, the Battle of the White Witch. The final performance was supposed to be live streamed. However, the performance was canceled due to COVID, and therefore we had a mock live streaming. And also this November, the Ichigawa Danjuro the 13 Hakuen and Ichikawa Shinnosuke the 8th, the first performance of Kakojo was streamed. And 2 days ago, Uirouri, the last day performance of that also was live streamed. And starting this month, we have paid streaming live overseas. So Kabuki on Demand, Heron Maiden, and Pulling the Carriage Apart, and Benten the Maiden and the Five Thieves are being performed. So Shochiku wants to spread Kabuki abroad, but this is still just happening. This is just starting, and we are also streaming in just 9 countries and regions. We are still struggling to see what the foreign or overseas audiences would like. Now, some of the issues and prospects of streaming. First of all, one issue will be profitability. Right now, Kabuki streaming is carried out. However, right now it is still in the red. The YouTube streaming, I have shown you the view numbers, and these were just success cases. Usually we do not get large viewers. It's usually around lower than 1,000 viewers, maybe sometimes only 500 or even sometimes only 100 people would view. Live streaming productions do incur costs. However, we are unable to recover these costs. And also, the people who are Kabuki goers are not really used to using the internet to see these things. We also receive a lot of questions about how they can view it. For the digital generation, people don't have to inquire how to utilize the internet. However, the Kabuki fans are more older people, therefore they need instruction in order to utilize the internet. However, the young people also may like Kabuki, some of the Kabuki works, and therefore they may be the ones that will help us spread the Kabuki works. So I showed you the figures of the free of charge views, but traditional ones, even for the paid views, the traditional ones are usually viewed by the elderly population, and young people do not really watch them. But of course, we want to provide Kabuki works to people who cannot come to the theater because of COVID, and also we want to spread Kabuki works, and therefore live streaming these traditional works are also very important. And I believe there are potential for secondary and tertiary use. These may be a way to make the streaming more profitable and for us to recover costs. Now, for prospects, one thing is that we need to deal with new technologies. For example, AR technology is used in Sho Kabuki. We have live streaming, but also we want to add some other things on top of it when we screen it later. So it is going to be a film that is quite different from watching the theater live. It's going to be a new entertainment product. Also, theatrical production can be experienced outside of the theater, but we want to make sure that it's going to be a more exciting experience that is different from going to the theater. For example, elderly people who cannot go out, they may watch these streamed works and have a feeling that they are going out into the theater. And this may also create new spaces to enjoy theater work. Maybe we have the chat function when we live stream, and through chat, the audience is actually enjoying sharing this opinion together. And with the Nico Nico Doga, sometimes the chat would appear on screen as you view the theater, and sometimes people who understand kabuki better provide explanation about the scenes that we are watching, and therefore this is creating another totally new experience. So you want to be connected with the audience, you want to be connected with the theater, and I believe that live streaming will create a totally new experience of theater work. So I have explained about our business at Shochiku. Thank you very much.
久保寺様、ありがとうございます。
Mr. Kubotera, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. So up to this point, we've been hearing about theatrical streaming, those who are involved in releasing for those purposes. From here, we're going to be talking a little about Shakespeare and Kabuki researchers, so specialists in their fields. So our third presentation is from the University of Birmingham, the Shakespeare Institute, Dr. Erin Sullivan.
Dr. Erin Sullivan is reader in Shakespeare at the Shakespeare Institute, Birmingham University. She is currently working on the influence of digital technology on the performance of Shakespeare at theatre, and recently published and edited two inspiring books, Lockdown Shakespeare, New Evolutions in Performance and Adaptation, and Shakespeare and Digital Performance in Practice. Erin will share with us the current state of online streaming screenings in cinemas in the UK, and the transformation of audience receptions and experiences of theatre due to the popularity of online streaming and screening in cinemas. Dear Erin, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ishibushi, for having me here today, and to all of the organizers. It's a real honor to be here. So I will bring up my slides. There we go. Wonderful. Yes, so as you know now, I work at the University of Birmingham, and they have a special research institute called the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon. So that's where I am speaking from today. So good morning from the UK, good evening in Japan, and everywhere in between. I think I've been invited here today because of some of the research that I've been doing on digital technology and Shakespearean theatrical performance. So I'm really lucky and pleased to say that this year I've had two books come out, one of which I've been working on for an awfully long time. So that's the first one here, Shakespeare and Digital Performance in Practice. And this is a book that I really started probably around 2015. And I was thinking about the ways in which digital technology was being used to reach new audiences, take Shakespeare to new audiences, and also the way that it was starting to reimagine what theater could be, or I should say that practitioners were using that technology to reimagine what theater could be. Like I said, I started this book well before the pandemic, but of course, when the pandemic happened, there were lots of new forms of digital theater that I became interested in. In some cases, those were previous productions that had been filmed and that were now being streamed online. And sometimes it was also work that was being created new for online audiences first. So the second book, Lockdown Shakespeare, is an edited collection that explored Shakespeare and live theatrical performance during the pandemic, or I should say during the first year, really April 2020, for about a year after that. And there's lots of different projects represented in this book, but I'm really pleased to say that there's also some work from Japan represented in it, from my colleague Yu Umemiya, who wrote about some work that Waseda students were doing and how they work to transfer their live theatrical performance to the online space. In all of this work, I've really been interested in how theater works in an online format, especially considering the ways in which theater has often been understood as a very physical, embodied, in-person, in the same room kind of experience, a kind of art form. I still, through this work, continue to believe that liveness as an experience and a concept is really crucial to theater. But I also think that liveness has different kinds of manifestations online, and that it doesn't simply go away, but it just evolves and sometimes looks like something different. So it certainly means that the idea of sharing the same geographical space changes, often sharing the same temporal moment stays the same, kind of like us here, working together in the same moment, despite being many thousands of miles apart. But I think also it can, liveness in the online space can even exist when that shared moment is happening in a different way, when you might be watching something that's a recording, but there's something that makes you feel connected to it, and crucially connected to either the performers or other audience members. So in a lot of my work, I've talked about not just liveness, but the idea of aliveness, how a moment of theatrical experience comes alive for a performer and an audience member. And it was really interesting to hear Ms. Buckeridge and Mr. Kubotera talk about their work in their theaters, and thinking about the ways that audiences can connect with the work, but also connect with one another. And that's something that's interested me, looking at audience behavior during broadcasts or other forms of digital theater. I've looked at the ways that audiences have used social media to communicate with one another and create a sense of event during a broadcast or during some sort of theatrical performance. And of course, as Mr. Kubotera was saying, there's other ways that can happen through things like chat boxes and other forms of shared experience, which really interests me. I should say, this is just to say as well that although my main interest is in Shakespeare, I am increasingly interested just in classic art and work around the world, different authors, and how it is reimagined digitally. So another project I've been working on is this one called Remixing the Classics, which doesn't just look at Shakespeare, but all different kinds of classic texts that are often seen as old, as high art, maybe as meant for traditional contexts, but that can certainly, we've seen, be reimagined in a digital format, in a digital age. So I'm really excited to learn about kabuki today. My own work in thinking about digital performance, experience, and especially community is actually rooted in my teaching. Because at the Shakespeare Institute, we are in many ways a very traditional, old-fashioned organization. We are a little beautiful house that was eventually turned into an educational institute. And it is very residential and very kind of, in a physical place. And of course, in Stratford-upon-Avon, this atmospheric place where Shakespeare was born. But what sometimes surprises people is that actually for the last 20 years, we've offered flexible courses where students can study at a distance, maybe mixing online and in-person teaching. And this is a screenshot from an example of a class that I teach before the pandemic in a blended format. So students who are there in the room, that's me in the top left-hand corner, but also students who are watching, in this case, an as live recording. So we record it live and then they can watch it later. It's now possible for them to watch it in the same moment simultaneously. But I think it was really that experience of teaching to different students who I feel connected to equally, really, but in different ways. The ones who are there physically in front of me, but also the ones who are around the world who are also very passionate about their subject matter. And thinking about the ways that we can all come together as a community, that has been so important to me, and it really inspired my work as an audience member in thinking about how theater might do this as well. So Ms. Buckeridge mentioned or talked about how the National Theatre really was the catalyst for theater broadcasting around the world starting in 2009. And then 4 years later in Stratford-upon-Avon, the RSC began broadcasting some of its work. And this was the first production that they broadcast live from their main stage. Because I'm based in Stratford, it was something that was very kind of present to me. And I was able to see this production both in the theater and in a theater broadcast. And during the broadcast, to have the strange experience of seeing my students in the audience and to think about the ways in which they were similar, but also the ways in which they were different. And it was interesting to me as well to think about the ways that these broadcasts reached audiences. First in the moment as a live broadcast, then as live encore screenings, both in cinemas, then on DVDs, and now, of course, on streaming platforms. And although in many ways, the thing itself, the recorded performance, is the same, there are slight changes that sometimes happen across that life. I think that the experience of engaging with them does change in interesting ways. So with my own work, the book that I mentioned that's come out this year, the main one, it really looks at three categories of digital performance. And I'll briefly talk about that before working towards wrapping up. It talks a lot about live theater broadcasts and live streams, and I think that's really the focus of today. So perhaps the thing that's most relevant to our symposium. And it does look at big global theaters like the National Theatre and others, but it also looks at smaller companies. This is a screenshot from a company called Forced Entertainment. And thinking about, how different camera choices, how different contexts affect the kind of theater that is created for audiences. It also looks at something that's often called intermedial theater. So that in certain ways is very traditional. It's theater that is in a particular place with an audience that's there as well, but that uses digital technology and media in a very central way to create the performance. So it's part of the creative process. This is an image from Toneel Group Amsterdam's Roman Tragedies, a production that is now over 10 years old, that has toured the world, that uses live filming, audience interaction, both physically in the room, but also through social media, to retell the stories of Shakespeare's tragedies, or sorry, Shakespeare's Roman plays, which are also tragedies. And then the last category that I look at is something that I call born digital theater. So theater that is digital first. And the image that I have here is from a production called The Under Presents Tempest. The Under Presents was and is a virtual reality gaming experience. And during the pandemic, they decided to stage an adaptation of The Tempest inside of that gaming world. It was a live performance. I was fortunate enough to be able to borrow a VR headset and attend it. And it really was very interesting to me, again, in terms of thinking about the experience of co-presence and how it evolves in a digital world. So of course, with the pandemic, we experienced many new kinds of theater, and Shakespeare, as well as other classic texts, were prominent in that evolution. A theater company called Creation Theatre here in the UK very quickly took a stage production, a live in-person stage production of The Tempest that they had done in previous years and translated it onto Zoom. And so this is a screenshot of Miranda and Ferdinand reaching across the Zoom divide to try to touch one another in the scene in which they're falling in love. And in the year and years now that have followed, other companies have followed suit, thinking about how a platform like Zoom, the one that we're on today, might be used to create theater. So one that I ended up writing a lot about was Big Telly's Macbeth, that also used Zoom, but played a lot with recorded and live footage and mixing between them and virtual backgrounds and kind of exploring the uncanny of the digital world in a way that informs the kind of uncanny supernatural aspects of Macbeth, the play itself. And also during the pandemic, there was a very grassroots theater company called The Show Must Go Online that ended up doing the complete works of Shakespeare. They didn't intend to do that at the start, but they did end up doing a show a week. And for me, what was especially interesting was how inclusive their company was and the way that they explored how, that these plays didn't have to be performed in a certain way by people who looked a certain way. And this was an all-female and non-binary production of Macbeth that they did. So I will wrap up now. I don't want to go over my time. Just say that in the conclusion of my book, I felt like there were three big takeaways that were important to me. When I was thinking about the kinds of digital performance of Shakespeare that I thought were especially successful, there were three characteristics that I noticed. One, it was a practical thing, that they were convergent. And what I meant by that is that they were spreadable, that they worked across platform. So you could find them in different ways. Sometimes that meant a recording that could be accessed on lots of different platforms, but it did also sometimes mean that you could be watching it on one platform, but interacting on another, a form of social media, that they harnessed the spreadable nature of digital culture. And in a lot of ways, harnessed the potential, that people can get distracted when they're watching things online, and they embraced that and found ways to work with it. They were also often hybrid, not just technically, but also thematically. So they used their hybridity as a focus to help people think about the hybrid nature of our own lives. And I think most importantly, they were often interactive. And I don't just mean that in a kind of gamified way, but I mean that they were interactive in a way that cued people to recognize that they were experiencing something live in a shared moment, and that allowed people to connect with others, whether that was performers or perhaps more often with audience members. So thinking about what's next, there's lots of possible things that are next, but I am, in terms of broadcasting, our focus today, especially interested in the ways that broadcasts and streams themselves might be evolving. Macbeth at the Almeida Theatre last year was live recorded, but used different techniques than what I had seen before, a lot of on-stage filming. And I know that All's Well That Ends Well, which was at the RSC this year, is now going into post-production, and they're mixing a kind of live recording format with more filmic formats. So I'm interested in the ways that some of the categories between theater and film, but also between the kinds of digital theater I've talked about today, might be blending and blurring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erin, for your wonderful presentation. And I think we can find lots of similarities and lots of discussion topics to explore between Japan and UK for the second half of this symposium. Thank you so much. 次のご登壇者の
So the next presenter will be and this will be the fourth presenter, is Professor Shoichiro Kawai. He is a professor at the University of Tokyo, and he is a Shakespeare researcher, one of the most famous researcher in Japan. And he has written many papers on Shakespeare, and he also heads the Kawai project, and Falstaff is one of the theaters that he will be doing. I hope you see my screen.
My name is Yuji Kawai. I'm not only a professor at the University of Tokyo, but as I was introduced, I was a translator of Shakespeare, and also I'm a producer and a director of theatre productions. I have produced several productions during the pandemic, so I'll try to talk from my own experience. Before I start, I would like to make it clear that I'm not the one to talk mainly about National Theatre Live. Flo has done the job beautifully. So my task here is to explain what kind of exploration has been attempted concerning the distribution of theatre online in Japan, and what possibilities we have for the future in the genre of theatre. As for the National Theatre Live, which I personally find wonderful, I adore it, I briefly refer to Simon Godwin's Romeo and Juliet and explain why we can say that Simon has established a new genre of theatre amalgamated with screen. Before referring to the expansion of online distribution of theatrical production in Japan, I would like to mention that there have been theatre archives available online. So these tools I'm going to show. I would like to actually show you the real ones. So, sorry. So this is the one, MIT's Global Shakespeare's, and there have been several short clips from the productions. These are archives. And in this archives, we can even see Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a very short script, but you can see it. And because the time is limited, I'm not going to show it for a long time, but you can play it and you can take a glimpse of what really happens in this theater. Like this. It's a 1 minute clip, but you can just take a very short glimpse about it. And also the next one is Asian Shakespeare Archive, Shakespeare performance in Asia. And Kunaoka's Othello's, Miyagi Satoshi's Othello is recorded here as well. So these are the past productions for the researchers and not for the general public, but we can see these things as well. So I would like to mention that first before continue. Now, during the pandemic, as for the productions for the general public during the pandemic, we have had several attempts for shifting the venue of performances from theaters to online. Members of Saitama Next Theatre, young actors company founded by the theatre director Yukio Ninagawa, established the seventh generation laboratory, Dainana Sedai Jikkeshitsu, in 2020. As remote reading experimental project by the actors who are forced to wait in their own house. So perhaps I can just show you this short trailer as well. Sorry for my. So this is their attempt, and this is Richard III, a short clip trailer here. And this is done through the Zoom, you can see. And many actresses and actors, and including me, gave them some airs. That's me. And they start like this. Okay, that's enough. I'll go back to my own PDF. So that's how they have done the Richard III, and also they have tried several things in this form. Because we are now allowed to get together, we are not allowed to get together. Each actor acted in their own house. Many actors and companies attempted this style, and it was called remote theater in Japanese. When Kawai Project, which is my own production, produced a reading production of King Lear in 2020, we had to resort to this style. Now, many famous actors also attempted this new experiment, and this is an example of reading performance of 12 Kind Japanese written by Koki Mitani, a project launched by an actor Yoshimasa Kondo. But there is a serious problem with this method. Namely, it is very difficult to establish the physical contact between characters. And here is a screenshot of a fighting scene from Henry IV, produced and directed by me last year. As you can see, Hotspur on the left is supposed to have a single combat with Prince Hal on the right, and Falstaff at the bottom is observing them, sharing his friend Hal. We have tried everything we could to pretend that they are having a physical fight, a physical contact, but of course there is a limit. So having produced King Lear and Henry IV in this style, I have to admit that I think there is no future for this remote theater. It is very fun creating these things, these productions, and we feel the meanings for ourselves. But as for the audience, it is very hard to integrate themselves into this kind of production. I would come back to this point later. My point is that audience is the very integral part of the theater. Now, this is another example. Another style of online theater is the filming of the stage performance without the audience. For example, a production of Yoko Oike's Inai Kamoshirenai, meaning she may not have existed, scheduled for April 2020, was cancelled because of the pandemic after rehearsals were completed. They repeated many rehearsals, and then suddenly they have to stop. The final rehearsal was filmed and has been delivered online through Kangeki Zanmai, a website for recorded and live streamed plays. Now, I have to I mention that this production, we can enjoy the production, but the point is they do not shoot the reaction from the audience. And the point I would like to make about the National Theatre Live is that it is very good attempt because it shoots the reactions of audience as well. So that's the very difference. That's the very important thing. Now, Kangeki Zanmai, the website for live stream plays and recorded plays, has become a very important website in Japan. For example, Hajime Yamazaki's new production of Rust-Colored Wooden Horse, performed in November this year, was immediately sold out, and the filmed version of the real performance with audiences in the theater is delivered via Kangeki Zanmai. So you can watch the production as if you are one of the members of the audiences recorded in the film. So this website was created in 2013 for those who have missed productions or those who couldn't come to theaters because of geographical and other reasons. But because of the pandemic, its significance has soared high. They started live streaming of performances in July 2020, and the number of the available performances on this website, which counted 1302 before the pandemic, has now risen to 20,165 now. The website lists many important theater companies, including Nitosha, Horipro, and Caramel Box. But as I said, some include not the real productions with the audience in the theater, but the rehearsals without the audience. At this point, I would like to emphasize the element of audience as an integral part of theatrical experience. I especially emphasize this point because I am also the director and also the member of the theater productions which have created these things. And I'm now translating Edgar Allan Poe's works for Kadokawa Bunko and came across Poe's comment on theater experience. Edgar Allan Poe said in his Marginalia that one half of the pleasure experienced at a theater arises from the spectator's sympathy with the rest of the audience, and especially from his belief in their sympathy with him. Now, of course, Poe is not referring to the theater online, but when he says, in the other instance, we may imagine how the audience is involved in the theater experience. He says that we, alone in our closet, are required to sympathize with the sympathy of fictitious listeners. This is sympathy double diluted, the shadow of a shade. In other words, the audience must be there in the theater. And even if it is delivered online, those who would later join online should be able to imagine that they are together with the audience recorded in the film. So that is how National Theatre Live works. They broadcast the audience's reaction as well. And I think that is the ideal mode of distributing theatre experience. There have been Tokyo Metropolitan Government subsidies for theatre online called Chairs for Art. And Kawai project was selected as one of them. And we produced a reading performance of King Lear. Here we were on the left side, with a limited number of the audience, as few as 15, but they are still there. 15 audiences were in the theater, and we recorded the production. The video is still on the website of Tokyo Metropolitan Government Subsidies, Chairs for Art. Those who were selected in 15 audiences seemed to enjoy the show, but honestly, we needed a stronger sense of sharing our theater experience. And for that, we needed more audiences. Today, we have many websites for live streaming, but I would like to emphasize that through live streaming, we need to feel as if we were in the theater together with other audiences. So these are several very important websites, and we can have an access to several recorded and streaming plays. Lastly, I would like to introduce the case of a theater company called Ikiume, Buried Alive. This production, à la marge, scheduled for May 2020, was postponed for a year and is now invited to Festival d'Automne à Paris in November this year. During the suspended period, Tomohiro Maekawa, the writer and the director, created Work in Progress, filming the process of making in a theater without audiences, and published the videos on their website. Again, they had to do without the audience. But they succeeded in creating a very tense theatrical space in which theatrical characters or actors themselves become the spectators to each other. They filmed the same process from different angles according to a different character's viewpoint. And despite the fact that there is no audience in the space, we, as an audience, are there in the acting space, identifying ourselves with a certain dramatic character. We felt it was possible to feel the illusion that we are involved in that space. So this is very thrilling and quite a new experience. Maekawa has explored, I think, a new possibility of experiencing theater. Another successful experiment without the audience was Simon Godwin's Romeo and Juliet in 2021, broadcast by National Theatre Live. It was a 90-minute film version of a stage production at the National's Littleton Theatre without the audience, and it was very successful because it explored something between the film and the stage. It has become something completely new. So in conclusion, we have a bright future for broadcasting the filmed version of a stage productions in the form of excellent NT Live, and at the same time, we have learned that we could explore something that is neither film nor stage production in a conventional sense. So lastly, I would like also to mention that the new project called EPAD started in 2020, and that it already established digital archives of about 100 and 300 productions, and it's going to add 400 in the near future. It is Japan Digital Theatre Archives, operated by the Theatre Museum of Waseda University. There will be a symposium tomorrow, so those who are interested should take a look at this page. Thank you. And so these are some related websites that I should have mentioned as well. So that's all for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. それでは最後の、
With that, we will now move on to our final panelist, and we are joined by Professor Ryuichi Kodama. He is the Professor of Faculty of Letters, Arts and Sciences, and is the Deputy Director of the Theatre Museum at Waseda University. He's going to be talking too about kabuki as well as classical Japanese performing arts. His specialism is those classical arts from the 19th century forward. So, Professor Kodama, please take it away. Thank you very much. So, for myself, my specialism is kabuki, but I'm going to be talking mainly about the streaming and distribution of classical performing arts in general. So traditionally, Japanese theater has not been known for its enthusiasm for distribution activities. So the existence of Kangeki Zanmai, which is mentioned by Professor Kawai, is known to avid contemporary theater watchers. But there have been very few commercial theatrical performances at large theaters. And with the exception of the Takarazuka Review, it is difficult to say that, in fact, theatre is engaged in distribution activities. It's just not very well known for those people who aren't that familiar with theatre in the first place. One moment, and I shall bring up a PowerPoint, just a simple deck. Having said that, It was important that the function of distributing plays was brought to attention by the COVID situation. In the future, it seems almost certain that the year 2020, when COVID first began its spread, will be seen as the first year of theatre distribution in Japan. With regard to kabuki, Mr. Kubotera has already talked about that, so I'm going to talk more about other classical theatre in Japan. I'd like to begin with bunraku, no, and also kyogen. These are the genres I'll be covering. So bunraku is puppet theatre. This photograph is just to give you an image, an idea. There had not been distributing its performances at all in the past, but now it is distributing performances from its home base in Osaka on a limited date and on a paid basis. So if you look at this month, from morning till night, they have 3 programs that they have morning to evening every day. Each program costs around 3,000 Japanese yen. And if you pay that, then you can enjoy that video for 2 weeks. That's the system that they offer. It's hard sometimes for some people to travel from Tokyo to Osaka, so Tokyo-based fans find this to be a very attractive and convenient service. Shochiku is a private company. So that a private company is the leading body for a classical body of art like kabuki is quite rare, I think, so that's an unusual situation in Japan. But kabuki is owned by private company Shochiku. Bunraku, in fact, though, is based at the National Theatre of Japan. I think the fact that bunraku performances are being distributed has had a big impact. And it's actually been helping to lead to distribution of archive performances of traditional court dances from the past too. And then talking about YouTube, so YouTube-based free distribution has gathered more than 100,000 followers, or in fact more than 200,000 people registered to a channel, and that form of art is called kodan. Kodan is the art of storytelling in Yosei theatre. Kanda Hakusan, one of the most popular storytellers of our time, has been uploading his stories to YouTube for, say, 6 days in a row or 19 stories in a row, and he uploaded those on a free basis, gathering a very large audience. Kodan had been thought to be a very minor art form, so that the fact that it could attract such a large audience had been really beyond everybody's imagining. But this format of telling a story one day at a time was excellent. It works extremely well with the YouTube format. So I think it's allowed us to realize the potential in that way. As you can see, there's subtitling too. In this respect, no, which requires a strong sense of realism and presence, with its many important scenes that are absolutely motionless, is not really suited for video distribution. I think that's where people see that. With COVID halting all performances, back in around September 2020, we started gradually resuming some of those performances, and there was a time when there was some distribution of no. And similar to no, there is a more important comedic format, kyogen. This is a format where the element of laughter is important, and the most popular performer, Mansai Nomuru's company, distributed visitors with the catchphrase, "Let's laugh at home." But I'm afraid to say this hasn't really become a permanent fixture. There are certain genres for which video distribution works. There are certain genres which know that they're not necessarily suited to that format. So Professor Kawai spoke about contemporary theatre, but during this COVID period, I wanted to introduce to you a few of the efforts that have been made by ourselves at the Theatre Museum. So I know Professor Kawai talked about EPAD and also JDTA, so let me touch upon those a little bit more. So this is the website of the Theatre Museum that I'm just trying to open right now. One moment, please. So the Theatre Museum website that I'm showing now, this EP, if you go into the JDTA site, the Japan Digital Theatre Activities, So there's been a vast number of video recordings, or should be, for classical and contemporary theatre, but no attempt has been made to kind of pull them all together in Japan. In New York, there's the performing arts wing of the public library, which gathers all that information together, but we don't have anything of that level in Japan that covers such a wide range of video material. And in fact, there's no real attempt, or had been no real attempt, to get to that. But with COVID happening back in 2020, the Agency for Cultural Affairs in Japan public solicited applications for a project to strengthen the profitability of the performing arts. And in response, the Emergency Performing Arts Network and the Terada Warehouse Company founded EPAD, the Emergency Performing Arts Archive and Digital Theatre, that is intended to support new recordings of stage performances. So this covers theatre, dance, traditional performing arts, those three fields. It's about supporting new recordings, but also to collect together existing performance footage as well as plays. And not just to gather them, but to deal with the handling rights so that we can make them available for distribution, which is one of the key points. So the footage that's being collected by EPAD is archived at the Theatre Museum. And we have created this JDTA, the Japan Digital Theatre Archives. It's an information retrieval site, and this is what you're seeing. This is where we have made it public. So there's only a few where you can see the full-length video, but if you come along to the Theatre Museum, it is possible for you to view this footage. The collection of videos here covers a wide range of genres and fields, not only contemporary theatre. Currently, we have around 1,300 pieces of footage. Because of rights and other reasons, kabuki is not particularly included in the collection, but just out of interest, I, as a researcher, have a personal collection of kabuki videos. That's part of what I do. And I personally have about, in our hard disks, about 1,300 videos in my own personal collection. So if you try and find DVDs, then, and you can give them to me, that will increase those. But I can't release that to the public. I can privately lend them out, but that is because of the rights issues. However, they are available to show in classrooms for educational purposes, but we cannot make them available to the public. If a researcher spends tens of years to collect this information, yes, they can get to it. But JDTA, in less than a year, in fact, in just about 6 months, has been able to gather together this volume of footage, and with the ability to be able to publicly make them available. And they've created a platform to be able to share this. This is a very meaningful step. Of the approximately 1,300 JDTA films, those that have been processed for rights can be viewed on the internet as trailer versions or digest versions of around 3 minutes each. So I've just completely randomly selected one to open here to show you. In this way, as you can see the video, you can see like the posters that went out for it. So all of this information and data associated with the production, you can view it from this place. And you can also jump to the site of the company that made this production. So that's how it's structured. So the video is about 3 minutes. So you can watch the video, but watching the 3-minute digest is not the purpose of creating this JDTA. It's about seeing this and then that triggering somebody to then actually go to a theatre. Hopefully, that is what the effect will be of this kind of site. That's where we have our hopes. So the relationship between new media and attracting new audiences is actually a problem that's been around for a long time. In Japan, back in the 1920s to 30s, when radio first became widely used, there's an art form in Japan called rakugo. So not stand-up comedy, but sitting down comedy, if you like. It's a single individual who performs a number of different roles, sitting down and does comic storytelling. So that rakugo format, they attempted to broadcast that on the radio. And the companies who were involved in rakugo said, if you broadcast this, then audiences aren't going to come and watch the performances. So to make sure that performances wouldn't do radio performances, they actually monitored those radio stations. But the rakugo artists made guerrilla-style performances at other radio stations. So this was a bit of an incident that we had in Japan. But the outcome was unexpected. People heard this on the radio, said it's really fun. I'd like to see this live. And it actually increased audience attendance. So I hope the video distribution will also lead to such a happy outcome for us now. So I mentioned radio, so let me mention TV as well. So when you talk about distribution, it's slightly different, possibly off topic, but I'd like to reiterate the fact that as a major premise, as far as Japan goes, TV stations are one of the most significant providers of video documentation of theatre in Japan. There is no doubt that they were delivering that, and I wanted to make that point today. The situation has changed now because of COVID, so I think theatrical distribution activities have been rapidly accelerated because of COVID, but it would be a mistake to think that there was no work to record and deliver stage footage to remote areas prior to COVID. There was such effort, and that's something that TV has been doing. It's been part of its role. In 2020, with the COVID pandemic breaking out, the vast majority of theatres were closed. I think was March 16th. 3 days later, I was actually to be found in Osaka in Japan, and I was there to provide a live theatre broadcast. I was doing a TV commentary. And I said, Theatre Relay has an important function of bringing plays to places where there are no theatres. But I am keenly aware that it also has a very important role in such unforeseen circumstances. And I said that, but because of time constraints, they cut it out and they didn't actually broadcast that. But those are my thoughts. So as far as Japan goes in terms of theatre broadcasting, the first ever program, TV program in Japan was theatre broadcasting. If you look in each country, the television situation, particularly in terms of theatre broadcasts and programs, is really not very well known beyond your own country's borders. I think we don't really know what goes on in other countries. So in the 1980s in Japan, the NHK broadcast a series of BBC Shakespeare plays. I'm sure they paid a very high broadcasting rights fee to do so. And if you talk to theatre researchers who are over the age of 50 now, many of them remember watching that on TV when they were children. Recently, with cable TV and the vast increase in the number of channels that are accessible to us, studio musicals and other productions are much more available to us. But whenever I visit London, I always go to Foyles in Charing Cross, take a look at theatre books and the theatre DVD section. And I once bought a DVD of Laurence Olivier's The Merchant of Venice, and this was back in 1974. This was an adaptation that was broadcasted on TV. And actually in Japan, there's just no store where you can go and buy this to see past DVDs of old TV programs. We just don't see that being available as a retail place in Japan. So there's a symbolic case in point regarding Japanese theatrical broadcast. This month, November, and next month, December, Japan's Kabuki World is hosting the unveiling of the successor to its most famous namesake, Danjiro Ichikawa. This photograph is of the 13th successor, but back in 1962, when the 11th Ichikawa succeeded to the title, all television stations, including the private commercial broadcasters, they competed to be able to broadcast this event. So in 1985, for the 12th succession, it was only NHK who wanted to broadcast this event. And in 2022, and as earlier we heard from Professor Kawai, things have changed, but Shochiku right now, they have their own cable TV channel, and I think that is where the event will be broadcast live from. In other words, in terms of delivering moving images to an unspecified large number of people, 1960s was a broader target. And as the years have passed, that has been a declining function. I think that's the situation. I think that's the fundamental problem. Because whether it's video distribution or theatre broadcasting, the biggest problem in Japan is that it doesn't matter how much the software is improved, how well the environment is set up, the genre of theatre in and of itself is declining in Japan. It continues to decline. Musical theatre is packed, Takarazuka reviews are really hard to get tickets for that. Kabuki does performances 12 months of the year, all year round. And small theatres are plentiful that you really would never be able to go to all of them. But there's this great polarization in our society, I think. The extremely enthusiastic avid theatre goer and those who just don't watch at all. And in between, there is some area of grey, but not that many, you know, the kind of light theatre goers. I don't go to that many every month, but I have some interest that is ongoing in the theatre. But that light theatre goer demographic is shrinking in Japan. The fact that you've seen a production is a really important memory for theatre goers, and I feel that that demographic, that population is also declining. And in fact, I have a hypothesis that television broadcasts of play may have been the way to reach those light theatre goers, the most important way. And I also believe that the video distribution environment should work best for that light theatre goer population. Rather than those avid fans who go and repeatedly watch the videos of their particular favorite performances, there's not a great deal of outcome or significance in targeting that group. You need to be targeting those light theatre goers to develop and cultivate that demographic. So while the National Theatre Live in London is supported in Japan by dedicated and avid fans, unfortunately, there's a large segment of Japanese people who simply don't even know that it exists. During COVID, the distribution of theatre has been recognized as an important issue, extremely important, that's very valuable. But in Japan, a lot of theatre artists were looking for public support and they were asking to be supported, and there was a lot of criticism of them. Like, you're very proud, why do you expect to be supported? So there was a lot of bashing of the theatre artists on the internet. And overseas, you don't really see that, this kind of targeting of the theatre artists. So I think the Japanese theatrical world has this lack of understanding in the public. And it's a very difficult situation that we're working within when we're comparing ourselves with overseas. So I wanted to pick that up as part of my speech. Thank you very much. Professor Kodama, thank you very much.
それではディスカッション
Then we would now like to move on into the discussion and Q&A session. And thank you very much to all the panelists, the presenters. And we have 50 minutes for discussion and Q&A. I don't think 50 minutes is enough time to discuss all these interesting things, but first of all, I would like to ask the presenters if you have any questions to the other presenters. Any questions from the panelists to the other panelists? Okay, then. Kodama-san, please. Rather than saying to the other presenters, I think I'll be asking in place of Kubotera-san. Kabuki, now you are trying to shift gears and live stream overseas, but cinema Kabuki, I believe, had that in mind from the beginning, it does seem. So let's say that in the UK, you will be able to view Kabuki with subtitles. Would there be a large audience? What is your impression? Do you think the UK will have a large audience if we were to live stream Kabuki or stream Kabuki in the UK? So are you asking me? Or are you asking the UK presenters? Yes, I was asking the question for you, but I wanted to hear from the UK panelists.
I think it would depend on a couple of things. Firstly, in terms of where it was streamed and how it could be accessed. I think that obviously we don't have any experience of broadcasting anything that isn't in the English language. So I can't speak for the popularity of that content generally, but I think it would be about working with a distribution partner that could get the widest possible network, or maybe working with art centres or arts organisations that do existing Japanese work, or have partnered with Japanese organisations. But I can't speak for audiences themselves, because I have no experience in working in that foreign language content.
Yes, I agree. I think with all arts broadcasts, finding a way to find the right audiences, and other presenters were talking about art forms, even with their home audiences, can be very specialist. So finding those people who are very interested or who like other forms that kind of act as a bridge to a new form is really important. And I also think, certainly from my experience with Shakespeare broadcasts, that ways to raise the visibility of the event and create a kind of event can be fairly powerful. So I think probably there might not be an immediate huge audience if something's just put online, just as there actually wouldn't be for Shakespeare in the UK if it's just there. But finding that way to locate the audience and also create an experience around it that's perhaps connected to an important holiday or dates, or something that creates a recognition and visibility, that certainly with Shakespeare is something that helps, I think, make meaning around that broadcast for audiences.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So we heard from Flo and Ellen. So Kodama-san, Kubotera-san. Yes, thank you very much. That's really helpful. As Flo said, the rights aspect is very difficult. So we may not be able to distribute a lot, and also we need to have English subtitles if we were to bring it overseas. So it may be difficult to have many works distributed, but thank you very much. We will try our best on that one. Thank you very much for that. Ellen, please.
Yes, thank you. I had a question for colleagues who are working, especially in theaters, and thinking about the transition that we're seeing in the UK from cinema only for broadcast to, as we saw during the pandemic, online and a platform like NT at Home. I know before the pandemic, there was some research from the Arts Council in the UK that suggested that streaming could diversify audiences further, that it might have greater audiences and be more accessible. But it obviously has its own business model that can be challenging. And I just wonder, sorry, this isn't a very well formulated question, but I wonder, as we're in this moment that in it itself is quite blended and hybrid, where people are going out more, but still maybe not as much as they used to, if you see streaming as a new powerful mode for distribution, or if it actually comes with a lot of challenges itself in terms of monetization and keeping subscribers on platforms and things like that.
I'm happy to answer that first, if that's okay. Yes, I mean, NT at Home and the kind of the first iteration of NT at Home I talked about during the pandemic, when we launched on YouTube and made things available for free. Both that and the paid for streaming platform, we have found that we do have younger audiences than we have coming to cinema, and in some ways coming to the South Bank as well. So there is definitely a diversification of audiences. Different productions are popular as well. So something that maybe didn't perform as well in cinema with what is our kind of core older audience has performed really, really well on the streaming platform with a younger audience. So that's been very interesting for us to examine. I think the the business model, I mean, we're looking at the moment at how we grow NT at home. We've kind of kept a steady flow of subscribers since we launched, and we haven't had a dip since kind of restrictions have been eased, but we also haven't seen a huge growth either. And we're looking at how we can grow audiences and how we can diversify the platform. I think one of the key things for us with streaming and a subscription service is content and having new content. So we now try and film everything at the National Theatre that we can get the rights to, with a view to it going on NT at home. So there's a huge amount of work involved in making the platform interesting and keeping it fresh for subscribers. We add new things every month. So it's an ongoing, you can't sort of sit back and go, oh, we've done it now and we've made 50 plays available, because that's not interesting for subscribers. You know, we're used to Netflix and Amazon, where there's new content all the time. So if you're competing with those kind of giants of streaming, which obviously we are and we aren't, but we are asking people to pay to see our content. We have to, one of the big things we are finding we have to do is to refresh the content, have new productions available. So it's a much faster churn of work than we've done traditionally into cinema.
Thank you so much, Flo. It's really interesting to hear about NT at home as ongoing process to keep growing in the future. And 今のお話を伺って、他の、登壇者
So listening to that, what about the other panelists? Did you have any comments or any other questions and so on? Yes, if I may, I wanted to talk a little bit from our perspective in Japan. So when you have online distribution, the younger element of the audience is definitely the case. I think we say that too. Will they actually come to the theatre? I think that is still a question for us. But, you know, opening up the people who are watching is an important thing for us. As mentioned earlier, that traditionally classic titles, the more well-known they are, young people are less kind of receptive to that. So those really famous, well-known classic, you know, artistic value versus what can be monetized, how we can make both of those sides work is really the challenge for us.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Very much. So based on everything we've talked to everything so far, Professor Kawai, do you have any comments?
Because those are concerning about the productions for the concerning of the financial problems. I think I'm not the person to comment on that. I'm only the real the one who going to produce the theater itself, and these other people are there to distribute online. So I think I cannot comment on that professionally. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. それではここで
So with that, so I think we have a comment/question for Flo. I think it's perfect timing to pick up on that. So let's move on to that question. Let me read that. So this is from Emi Hamana.
I am interested in theater and digital technology. You mentioned particular knowledge and experience in all things digital, blah, 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 and in LinkedIn. And what is most required considering shortage of skills in theater industry? Philosophy, where do we stand now? It's really a good question, but where do you think we should or we could go? Could you please answer this question, Flo?
Yes, thank you for your question. I suppose there's a variety to answer the first part in terms of skills. There's a variety of skills required. As a number of us said, that the rights are really important. So I think it's very different putting on a stage production to recording that stage production and therefore everything that's in it is recorded. So things like commercial music have to be cleared in a very specific and quite complicated way. And obviously the rights in the actual production itself, from the writer, the director, the performers, everyone involved. So there is some skills required around rights acquisition, around contracting in the digital film world. I'd say one of the key points for us at the National Theatre has been to partner with particular experts in broadcast. So we bring in, every time we film something, we bring in a big group of freelancers, so multi-camera directors, film and television sound supervisors, film and television lighting supervisors. So we bring in, rather than having all of that in-house, we bring in for every production that we do a group of freelancers who have very particular skills, but we've built relationships with them over time and work with them very closely. So it's about finding the right partner. I think if you're a theatre, about finding the right partners to work with for the filming as well. And then in terms of so I guess what I'm saying there is I don't think necessarily if you're a theatre producer, you need to have know absolutely everything about how to make a film, because there are people that you can work with who can help make that happen. And the philosophy of where we stand, I think, is a really interesting one. As I said, when we launched NT Live and went into cinemas, the way we sort of justified it, or our philosophy behind it, was that it was a shared experience. You were in an auditorium when you were in a cinema with other people. You could hear them clapping, you could hear them laughing. It was still that shared event that you get with theatre. And obviously streaming and television is a kind of step away from that. You're dealing with smaller screens, and a different quality of sound and all of those things. I think for us it's really it comes back to audiences and being able to reach a wider range of audiences. And a bit about what I was talking at the end is that hopefully those younger people who might watch something that we've streamed that has a famous actor in it, in the future, they might not come to the National Theatre now, but they may do in the future, or they may go and experience other theatre, and it's kind of opening a door to them of something new. So we hope that it still builds a theatre going audience. We definitely don't see it as replacing live theatre at all, both with cinema and with streaming. For us, we are a theatre and things happen physically on site on our stage, but that doesn't mean that can't be shared with new people and people who can't get there either. So I think for us, we always come back to, who is this for? Who are our audience? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Flo's answer to the question was really interesting, and also it relates to our today's topic and shared experience, and also the importance of the shared experience within the audiences. And
so that shared experience, that a shared experience is had by the audience, sharing the space together, is something that is really something that I think each of the panelists today has touched upon. It's been a common theme that's been coming out from all of the presenters. So relating to this point, is there any additional comment, anything that you wanted to say, anything, a more developed comment? I don't know whether anybody else would like to add anything to that. So earlier from Mr. Kubotera, he was talking about Chokabuki, the super kabuki. It's really hard to kind of get your head around that if you've never seen that. I've actually got a picture that I wanted to share on screen, which hopefully will help people get a better idea. So what I'm sharing now, this is Kabuki plus Hatsune Miku. This is a virtual character. She is a virtual singer. And it's a joint performance between Kabuki and Hatsune Miku. So this is the Nico Nico Doga. Those who watch, you can write in your comments. It's a subscription, or sorry, it's a streaming system where you can write your own comments, where you can react. So Shochiku plus the distribution works together like that. So there's this live performance acting that is happening at the same time that is simultaneously being streamed. You can see it in the live theater as well. So there is this combined experience. Normally, kabuki performers don't do that. They don't turn to the audience and talk to the audience. They're kind of, building the audience up here. But when you watch it like this, it's just regular kabuki. But then like this, on top of that, you get this many different people basically writing in a great variety of their comments and observations and feelings and their views of what they're viewing. You can see you can actually color a lot of this information, and there's almost like this close relationship between the color of the comments plus what's actually shown on the performance. I thought so, particularly for the first performance. So you can see the flowering of kaneki. This is part of what the performance is, and you can see that from the audience, the words and the typing in, you get the color and the flower motifs. So you can see this sakura, the cherry blossom, that is regenerated and reinvigorated in the story of the performance. So if you're watching this via streaming, you feel like you're participating in moving the story forward. That's the way I think it was created. So in that sense, I think it was very well done. And I think it was completely new in the world of kabuki for young people. A lot of people, they haven't seen kabuki, and it really drew their enthusiasm. So I thought this was a very interesting experiment. But this experience, do these young people then come to the kabuki theater? Maybe not so much. So I think this is what Mr. Kubotera was talking about earlier. That is where you get that gap between the streaming and the real theater. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kodama. And the Cho Kabuki, the Nico Nico Live, you see the comments, and I think this relates to Ellen's research. So if we can compare the examples between Japan and the UK, what are your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. I love this example of Super Kabuki. Thank you for showing those images. I think it is, ultimately, I think audiences, if there's something they want to see and it's really good, then that in and of itself will be enough. If it's filmed well, that the thing itself brings them there. But I do also believe that the experience that surrounds that art object, in this case theater, can really make a difference in the way that audiences feel connected to it, and to the extent that they experience it as a theatrical event. So that layering that you showed of the filming with a kind of audience participation, I think especially the fact that audiences can see themselves visibly in the experience. And I think there's lots of ways that can happen, even really simple things with streams where audiences can see a counter that shows how many people are watching simultaneously. That's a very subtle and small device, but I do think it makes a difference to people to see their participation represented. And so something like what you shared, Professor Kodama, where they see themselves in quite a visible way, I think is really powerful. And certainly in some of the research I've done about pre-pandemic, about audiences who used different forms of social media to talk about something they were watching simultaneously, was really interesting. And it feeds into research that is about the value of talking with others about art, that is relevant to the digital context, but is also relevant beyond the digital. There's a lot of research that suggests that audiences find additional value in an artistic experience, like a theatrical performance, if they can talk to other people about it, sometimes in a post-show chat. So it's that kind of experiencing something and circulating it back. I suppose it's a feedback loop, and I think it can help people feel really tied into the moment. And the one other thing I'd add is kind of, I don't know, maybe a bit iconoclastic or controversial in this discussion, is that I love theater and I would love to see all of these things. So I'm all for all the different kinds of broadcasting and for people going to live theater. But I also think, obviously, I don't have to think about this financially, but I also think it's okay if audiences engage with digitized forms of theater and perhaps don't end up going to in-person theater. Obviously, I would like people to see all kinds of art in all different forms. But I think the more people are engaging with art forms that encourage them to experience something aesthetically, to invite them to think, then it doesn't worry me too much where they go with that. What's most important is this cultivation of a real appreciation of what art can do for us. Obviously, I still really want people to go to the theater, and I want theater to survive and thrive in this world.
Thank you so much. 最終的に
So in the end, I think whether or not the audience really comes to the theater or not, that's a very big topic, I believe. But even if they don't come to the theater in the end, if they can virtually share the space and experience, I think the shared experience of the art form is quite significant on its own. So based on Erin-san's comment, anything else?
Yes, I think it is very wonderful to go to go to theater in person. But I think the important thing is the connectedness, that the feeling that we are together. So even if we are not in the real theater, perhaps we can connect each other, as you mentioned, through chat communication and through SNS and so forth. And we can perhaps build up a new site, new area in which we feel the sense of this the connectedness. And I think that would be a very important element for furthering, developing our theater in the future, perhaps.
Thank you so much, Professor Kodama. The importance of sense of connectedness is a really important issue to explore. And does any other speaker have comments or questions so far? いかがですか?
Anything from anyone? Well, for example, this sense of connectedness, I think this is quite an important topic as I listen to all the presentations. And Professor Kodama said in your presentation that this streaming may bring out this sense of connectedness, but it may also separate people and divide people. I think you mentioned that in your presentation. For example, digital poverty or digital divide is another issue. When we think about sense of connectedness, I think that's a very important issue. So any comments from our panelists about that point?
Sure, I'll just be very brief. I think that's a really important point, and a lot of the celebration of digital technology is about increasing access, but it's of course so important to remember that it's not universal and it's not always easy. So I think that's something, I think that the pandemic has helped bring that more and more to light, a truth that was already there. I still think that the technology creates opportunities for access that are limited in other contexts, especially for people who are kind of confined to their homes, irrespective of the pandemic. But yes, I think looking at digital connectivity, not just for theater, but for education, for access to social services is so important. And I think also ways in which access to, in this case, theater can be supplemented through other forms, other modes like television, which was talked about, which is digital, but can also run through other technologies, and also through kind of TV broadcasts or streaming that are in shared spaces, which is less common. But I would love to see theaters and opera events broadcast in the way that you see into pubs, like you see the football and things like that. I know it's a long shot and it would only be for very niche audiences like us, really. But that possibility is something that I find really interesting.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I think connectivity that is possible through digital is kind of really, well, it's not endless, but there's lots of different ways. I know, Ellen, you talked about the kind of the social media and how people connect with each other on the live on a broadcast night, and that's been a massive thing for us. Kind of the conversation online about people watching something in cinemas together and then talking about it has been really fantastic. Our kind of online audience are amazing and are very excited about everything that we do, and really kind of help drive sales, if I'm honest, and kind of a wider audience, because when something is trending on Twitter, people can see what people are talking about. And also we also found that particularly when we did the YouTube sort of streams where people were talking to each other on the YouTube chat function as well, which was really kind of amazing to see. So people saying, I'm watching from Thailand, I'm here in New York or whatever, and that's kind of that is really wonderful that people can be in different places all over the world and in different time zones and kind of experiencing something together. I think one of the things that I've always really loved about NT Live, particularly in the UK, is that we're in so many, we're in a huge number. It's obviously the place where we're in the largest number of venues that we have. And lots of those venues are not traditional cinemas. So they are village halls or have other functions. One of them is a bookshop, and they really create a sense of community. So we hear, you know, lots of people from the village, we all came down together and we watched it, and then we walked home together and we talked about it on the way home. So that's kind of lovely, and kind of slightly akin to what you're saying about in pubs and shops, Ellen, and screening in different ways. So I think there's the connectivity was there pre-pandemic, but the during the pandemic, it was certainly felt like a bit of a lifeline to know that other people were experiencing things at the same time. And for us, as I say, we just wouldn't, if there hadn't been the pandemic, that we wouldn't have NT at home. We just wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't have wanted to kind of challenge that philosophy about watching something on a small screen. And so it's although it was kind of awful, and where the industry is, theatre industry is still very much recovering from it, as is film, it has allowed us to look at different models of how we share our work.
Thank you so much.
The other speakers, I would like to just invite you, if you have any questions or comments. I think it's exactly as I'm hearing from everyone else right now. Digital allows you to overcome time difference, overcome differences in region. There's this horizontal spread, you can see lateral spread, which is wonderful. But there is a different kind of connectivity or connectedness that I wanted to mention as well, which is that you're living in the same time period and you're connected with the people elsewhere. Yes, but let's look at the other way. Let's look at it along a timeline, connecting with people in the past. What about that? In other words, you know, we've been talking about, Mr. Kubotera has been talking about classical titles, classical productions. It's hard to really attract audiences to that. And Professor Kawai was talking earlier about Peter Brook's, you know, legendary performance. And, you know, he showed us a very brief clip in his presentation. In other words, historic footage, this almost legendary performances that we know about, those kind of images, footage, we're in a world now where it's easy to access those things. So the history of theatre, I don't know if we would call that, or you can have almost a similar experience to that is crossing generational boundaries. Maybe isn't that something that is becoming possible? And yet, despite that potential possibility, that just doesn't seem to be realized. In the case of Japan, I certainly feel that way. So what is it like in London, if I could ask the UK participants?
Before that, I would like to comment briefly about what is lacking in Japan and what they have in England is that educating young people in the genre of theatre. I think we are very belated in exploring the young audiences Whereas in the National Theatre, I think they have done a great job for educating young people. Could you comment on that, Flo, please?
Sorry, could you repeat that last bit again?
Yeah, you have done a great job in educating young audiences, I think. So perhaps you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, we at the National Theatre, we're always trying to attract younger audiences. I don't know exactly what it's like in Japan, but certainly in the UK, generally, a theatre-going audience is older. So theatres across the country are always trying to diversify their audiences and bring in young people. I think what we have been able to do with certain productions that we've been lucky enough to be able to broadcast. So, for instance, most recently, Prima Facie with Jodie Comer in it. We've done Fleabag with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Titles that have talent involved that are kind of really exciting to a younger audience has really enabled us to cross over and move away from just reaching our kind of traditional older audience. So I think it and obviously having a streaming service which is subscription but also pay-per-view, so you can just pay to see a particular title, has meant that we're able to reach more people. But I do think it's very much for us content driven, and it really depends on what production attracts a younger audience. So that's and we know that when we can tap into a younger audience, the potential for audience is so much bigger. So we're always on the lookout for those kind of exciting projects that would cross over and have a broader reach than everything that we film. Although we also want to ensure that we are still sharing a wide range of productions, including classics. And so I think for us, it has been very much content driven.
So in the case of Japan, in the National Theatre in Japan, junior high school, senior high school students, we have these viewing classrooms. So we invite them to classical productions. We've been doing that for more than half a century, more than 50 years. So it's a regular periodic thing. But a lot of the teachers who come along, they're not that interested in drama and theatre. And I think fundamentally this theatrical sector, how much of that is really rooted within society in Japan, I think that's one of the issues. 100 years ago, Japan had this really strongly rooted culture and interest in theatre, but gradually the awareness, if you like, of theatre is shrinking in Japan over the years. So I think it's trying to recover that, get back from that, and we have to find ways to get that back. So Shochiku, for example, recently in the field of kabuki has started taking on board animations and manga. So they're trying to produce new productions based on those stories. So as far as young audiences, that may be the only target demographic for that, but as an experiment, as a trial, I think it's a valid thing to do. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Yes. So about getting a younger generation of audience is a very difficult thing to try. And just as Professor Kodama was saying there, these manga titles, animation titles, we are working on those productions. So I think opening up the generations, making the effort to do that, but also we, find the grandchildren come along and their grandmothers and grandparents bring them along. So we kind of get the old audience coming to, the previous audience coming to. So we start to see this cross-generational interaction. So I just wanted to suggest that as well as an item. Thank you very much. So what you just mentioned there, I think we have a question that's tied to that. So let me try and read through that. So this is a question for Professor Kodama. The light fans of theatre, light theatre goers, you were talking about TV programs having an important role to play. However, from this year, NHK the time that NHK assigns to traditional art performances is shorter, so it's harder to get that exposure. What kind of concerns do you feel? Do you feel we have to have more TV programs involved and we need to broaden out those televisual exposures? Yes, so with regard to NHK, which is a public broadcasting body, so they're not interested necessarily in viewing figures. They're able to look at it and do more bold things. They don't have to be so commercial. But unfortunately, looking at NHK now, that's not the way they actually operate, is something I am forced to say. And in fact, this is because the senior executives at NHK, their understanding of theatre, their familiarity with theatre is not so great now because they've switched to a generation that hasn't had that kind of exposure. So somebody who has a great interest and empathy with theatre, once somebody like that takes those top executive roles, then, you know, perhaps things will change. I mean, we have to have hopes there. That's what I think on that one. I see. Thank you. So with that, we have further questions for our speakers, so I'd like to switch on to those. Let me try and find some of those questions now. So this is a question for Ms. Buckeridge. You were talking about certain productions will pay their way, some do not. So you were talking about popular productions that pay their way. Is there a tendency and a bias or trend toward those?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for NT Live, we know sometimes that not every broadcast will make a profit. It's really expensive to broadcast into cinema. So the costs are very high, and we operate on a profit share with us and any producers and artists involved. There is, yes, so as you'd expect, the titles that you think would perform really well and therefore generate a greater return are those ones that you'd expect. So prima facie, as I mentioned, Fleabag, Frankenstein with Benedict Cumberbatch, Hamlet with Benedict Cumberbatch, lots of Shakespeares as well that have performed really, really well. We try and balance out across the year that the bottom line that we are generating income for the organization. We have a remit that we need to do that. There isn't a sort of bottomless hole where they can invest money into us. We have to be generating a return. We have to be sort of sustainable and self-sufficient in that sense. But what is interesting is, as I mentioned a moment ago, some of the productions that didn't perform as well as we might have hoped in cinema have performed really well on the streaming platform. So there, and I'm not sure I would have been able to predict that. So that's been kind of interesting, and we're learning about the audience trends and what is more successful on a streaming platform versus what goes into cinema.
Okay, thank you so much. そして、最後のご質問ですけれども、浜田恵美先生から To all the speakers, South Bank is a fantastic location for families, couples, younger people, kids, as well as elder people. Younger people in Japan are not likely to go to Ginza so often. という、コメント。
So that's the comment that we've received from Ms. Emi Hamana. What do you think?
Conscious of this problem for decades, and yes, in England there is a great, huge culture for all the public to appreciate the theatre. But in Japan, as Kodama Sensei has mentioned, that we have losing this interest as a culture, and at the same time, geographically speaking, we do not have this local point to which we gather together to enjoy. Like, for instance, National Theatre has built, but it's not a very attractive place. And the Tokyo Geijutsu Theatre has also attempted several things for like a festival. But again, because it is a very limited space between just in front of the Ikebukuro station, I think it's very hard to establish a kind of gathering atmosphere there. Not least because the general public do not have this sense of this strong sense of this desire to enjoy theater as much as they do in England. I think that's the very serious problem in Japan.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So, based on the comment that we heard from Professor Kawai, Professor Kodama, or Kubotera-san, well, yes, as I have been saying, it's exactly that. And about the place, in the 1940s or 1950s, in Tokyo, people gathered in Asakusa, where there were many theaters, and also in Osaka, there were many theaters in the Dotonbori district. There were these districts with a lot of theaters. However, in the past several decades, they have disappeared. In Tokyo, there are many theaters. However, Tokyo is a bit too big, I must say. And also, around Tokyo, you have the residential areas. So it's quite different from London, Paris, New York. We have to cover a much wider area. And so maybe that's one reason it's very difficult to have many people come to the theater. So we can't really resolve this issue here and now, but I think that's one unique feature of Tokyo. However, Ginza, Hibiya, yes, there are still many theaters, but I think these are districts that are visited by older generations. I think that's the image that many people have. Yes, I totally agree. Tokyo has many theaters, very many small theaters as well, and also where you can listen to the comic storytelling, but it's all scattered all around. We have Shimokitazawa, where young people gather, and there is this gathering of small theaters in this district. However, it's just too scattered, and I think that's one feature of Tokyo. So you can have a discount for the on-the-day ticket, but you can't really know if the audience is living in an area where you can buy the ticket an hour before the show starts and then come to the theater within that hour. It's very difficult to see that possibility. So London is a place where you can just walk several minutes and then arrive at the theater. So it's quite different here in Japan. Thank you very much. I think we are now about arriving at the time to end. So if we can go around the table and ask the panelists for one final word before we end. So, but before that, just one thing. So theater, the place, and in London, the Arts Council subsidy issue really was a shocking thing. The theaters that got a lot of subsidies may move out of London. That was one of the conditions to gain the subsidies. I read in a news article. So it does seem that streaming may have a different role to play, and also how will theaters move into more rural areas? Once again, I think we need to think about what role streaming can play in all this. So if we can go around the table for one last comment from each of the panelists. So in the order of the presentation, starting with Flo, please.
Thanks very much. I just want to firstly say I've really enjoyed this morning and this discussion, and to hear all of the really fascinating things that you're doing, from writing books and producing and directing productions and streaming those. It's really interesting to hear all about your work. Yeah, I guess my kind of closing comment is I'm so interested to see what the future holds, and where this sort of development of streaming theatre will go. I think that we're still in its infancy in some ways. Obviously, cinema and has existed for a long time, and we have produced DVDs in the past, but the kind of the breadth of work available now and the number of arts organizations making their work available digitally, I think is really interesting. And I look forward to seeing how that develops. I know we at the National Theatre are really invested in growing it and growing our audiences, but we're only able to do that if we have the pipeline of work on our stages. So, you know, it's a very symbiotic relationship. We're totally reliant on the theatre, which is the way, you know, the way it should be, because as I say, I don't see it as a replacement for theatre, but I do think it's a kind of slight hybrid art form, and it has a place in its own place in art and in the way of experiencing theatre and connecting people. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the future holds. But thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Flo. それでは、次に、
Then moving on to Mr. Kubotera, please. Yes, thank you very much. It was really inspiring to listen to all the presentations, so thank you very much for that. So we have now steered our way towards digital. I don't think we can go back. So new technology we will see more new technology, and I believe we need to think about the role theater will play within those technologies. I think that's going to be the key going forward. And also about place. Yes, I'm very happy to have heard your opinions on that. And it was a great fun listening to the presentations and also the discussion. Thank you very much. Then Dr. Erin Sullivan, please.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to echo everyone's comments about what a great symposium it's been. Thank you so much. And I think just listening to everyone talk both about the digital, but also about the physical in their respective cities, it just reiterates for me how important it is to find shared cultural spaces. In sociology, there's this concept of the third space where people can go that's not home, that's not work. And I think that especially as we've gone through this period where people have been so based at home, and there's a lot of culture that is retreating to the home, which sounds negative. There's a lot of good things about being in the home, but it can isolate people. And so I'm really interested from the discussion today to think about how the work of creating digital third spaces goes hand in hand with those physical ones, and that it's not an either or situation, that just like our lives now, real life involves digital culture. There's not this complete binary or that separation between the two. I'm interested in seeing how culture, shared culture, can be both digital and physical at the same time.
Thank you so much for your thought-provoking comments. それでは河合先生、よろしくお願いします。
Thank you very much.
Professor Kawai.
It has been a wonderful experience participating in this wonderful discussion. And it is true that we have suffered much in this pandemic, and we have had several errors and trials and errors and so forth. But I think we have learned something from that experience, and the streaming and also the new forms of theater, I think, the results that we have got through those experiences. And I think we are now in the new decade, new era, in which we are looking forward to the new types of theater, I think. And streaming and theaters online, certainly, I think, will have a new future. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. それでは最後に児玉先生よろしくお
And
願いします。
finally, Professor Kodama. Thank you very much, everyone. So I was able to participate as a panelist, but I'm also a member of the Theatre Museum, so it's been a great privilege to participate this evening. So in terms of developing human resources, Flo was talking about that earlier, I think. So I just wanted to explain just one thing that we're trying out at the Theatre Museum. The Donuts Project is what we've called this. So theatre is something that can disappear. So we wanted to gather together the document because there's this moment that we share that's in the middle that is lost because once the performance is done, it's finished. So we're gathering everything that's peripheral around it. So we're trying to find a way of putting together a digital archive, how we're putting together digital contents, and how do we grow resources that can support all of this structure. So this is something that we are trying out here in Japan and thinking about COVID as a trigger that's allowed us to open up this area as well. So I hope that people can have some interest in what we're trying to do there. I think that from here on in, how we work between theatre and digital is such an interesting topic. I think we've been able to hear so many different things and viewpoints from everybody who's participated today. But for example, NT Live, I go to the cinema and I think I would realize that I didn't know a lot about the history of NT Live, despite being a cinema goer. And I think kabuki distribution of images, I think there's a lot of lack of knowledge about that right now. So thinking ahead for the post-COVID generations, I think the things that we're trying to do right here, right now, the relationship between digital and theatre, I feel like, let's think about the people who are going to be born from here on in, people who are going to be born in the post-COVID era. How will they view the digital and theatre relationship? It's just going to be completely normal for that generation who is yet to come. So that relationship between theatre and digital, how that will be formed and shaped, this is something that is already history. We have to start talking about this as part of our history. That's something that I have kind of become aware of today. So thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, presenters for really stimulating, invigorating discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you to today's audience and for watching our symposium. It wasn't a very long time, but I think that from here on into talking about theatre and streaming, there'll be many discussions in many different places that will continue to happen. And I really look forward to being part of that. Thank you very much.
皆様ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, everyone. With this, we have completed our symposium program. Today, I'm afraid we have slightly exceeded our allotted time, and we were also not able to answer all of the questions. I apologize for both of those points, but I hope you understand that we are working within a set time. So once you exit this webinar, a questionnaire will be displayed. And so if you can help us with answering that questionnaire, that would be wonderful. That would very much help us here at Theatre Museum. We're going to continue to have events and symposiums that we are planning, and we're really looking forward to your participation. Thank you very much for today.